When you show up in the morning, you never know exactly what you're going to find. So.
Oh, he's big. Oh my gosh.
Willie Nelson. Yeah, we're giving them good grass, and they're giving us back that manure.
In the heart of the Snoqualmie Valley, surrounded by mist and mountain ridges, lies Carnation Farms, a place with a long agricultural history that's now reimagining what farming can look like in a changing world. Once a conventional dairy operation, Carnation Farms is now a regenerative farm, event space, and farm stand, growing food while healing the land that grows it. But what does that actually mean? How does a farm regenerate instead of deplete? And what do sheep have to do with vegetables? And how the heck do they make enough money to keep the farm running? To answer these questions for us, I had the privilege to get an exclusive farm tour from the very, very busy Eric Popp, the Director of Regenerative Agriculture at Carnation Farms. Because I live in elk country, I had to disinfect my boots before going to visit the sheep. Elk can spread diseases to livestock, so farmers implement protocols like this to protect their animals. On our way out, we also passed the morning harvest of market vegetables from the market garden, which was a little bit of a taste of what was to come in the tour. It was pretty clear that everyone at the farm had already been up for a couple hours. First stop on the tour was to check out the sheep. The farm produces both beef and lamb for customers, but they also use the sheep to help build their soil in the market garden. Conventional livestock farming can actually deplete the soil, so my main question for Eric going into this tour was how do they use livestock in a way that helps build soil rather than deplete it? As you'll see, I also got to learn what sheep breath smells like.
Oh, he's big. Oh my gosh.
Willie Nelson. And his sidekick over there is Peppercorn, and they're the two rams we've had for several years now.
So you have sheep and cows.
Mm-hmm.
What is the difference between as far as their impact on the land?
It's an impact-based decision as well as a demand-based decision, so there's just more demand for beef.
Yeah.
And we happen to have a really special variety of beef, the Belted Kingshire, which is a breed that was bred to grass finish in King County in 2 years. They're a 3/4 sized animal, and we like the fact that they weigh less than conventional cow because I think that the impact is lower.
Yeah.
They're also really, really well adapted to grazing the forage that exists here, like much better than an Angus or similar variety. Not integrating our cows into our cropping production.
Yeah.
Because of that impact. Any sort of impact that precedes or follows crop production is always going to be sheep. It's just
Cool.
so much easier to manage them in those tighter spaces.
Yeah. How often do you move them around?
We move it every couple of days.
Okay. Wow, that's quick.
Yeah. It's a necessity for this style of grazing because one of the big things that we're looking for is long rest periods in between grazing, among a couple other things like high impact in a short period of time, lots of manure getting compressed into the soil, and then when we see forage just kind of depleted over the course of a day or two, we move them to the next pasture. And in springtime, we're bringing them back to the same spot roughly every 45 days. In the summertime, we're shooting for about 90.
How electric is it? Like, if I touched it, would I know?
You would definitely know. It's not pleasant. It's not the worst in the world, but it's just enough to,
To kind of get them to...
keep them in place, I would say probably 360 days of the year.
Uh-oh. Do you get some rogue sheep sometimes?
Yeah, it's livestock farming. When you show up in the morning, you never know exactly what you're going to find. So
Eric talked a lot about the importance of selecting breeds and characteristics that fit the climate and environment that you're raising them in. You can't just get any sheep breed on any farm. Here in Western Washington, where it's very wet, hoof rot is really common, so they are always on the hunt for breeds that are resistant to that.
But yeah, and I would say, especially when you get new breeds, you're looking at, in the first couple of years, really, really high rates of culling, just until you get that stock that's better adapted to your property. You also have kind of like a dip in productivity and breeding. Once they're better adapted to the property, they're moving around less, the hoof health should increase, the productivity and birthing rate should increase. For the field that we're in and all of the fields behind us, all of these ideally will remain in pasture indefinitely.
And the pigs would be cycled into the market garden livestock cycle.
They would probably be the ones that are going to be following crop production because they don't have as many concerns for bloat as the sheep do. So they would be able, I think, to forage some of like the crop residue better than sheep would. So
like little carrots or like kale or
Exactly. Yeah. If these guys get into too many brassicas, we'll come across some issues that we don't want to see in the field in the morning. So
yeah. So they just like grass. the sheep.
Yeah, grass is definitely the best forage for them.
Yeah.
So even things like clovers, you got to be careful with. So
Wow.
the varieties of clovers that we choose when we do actually plant them, we work with a company to try and specifically select clovers that are considered low bloat clovers, so that we can give them the best diet possible.
There's so much science behind it all, and
Plan in the near future to do any sort of like vegetable production or grain production. However, if, like, let's say this were our cropping area, and they were in pasture in there, which is generally a lot of the year there is pasture in that area, this same process would be happening, and what we'd be looking for would be them depositing the manure, them helping to reduce some of the grass cover here, because it's the quicker that you can get that to break down prior to cropping, the better. Generally, that's going to be like your biggest delay, especially when there's low ambient moisture or low rainfall or something like that, is getting that cropping material to break down. So the fact that they're transitioning it into manure, making it more bioavailable for the plant, reducing the amount of plant material that actually needs to decompose during that tillage process, is kind of what we like to see preceding when we actually break a field out for crop productions. Yeah, you can feel free to give him scratches. He probably ain't going anywhere at this point.
he's like, "What are you doing?" Like a dog, just gonna lick me right in the face.
Kind of hard not to fall in love, huh?
I know. Better breath than a dog, surprisingly.
On the way to the market garden, Eric explained that the sheep are brought into the market garden after a year or two of planting, and then cover crops are sown. The sheep are brought back in to munch on the cover crops, and the area is left fallow for about 2 to 3 years before being lightly tilled and converted back into a market garden. The sheep help all of the plant material convert more quickly into fertile soil.
So we've brought animals through here a few times and had some longer rest cycles, and then eventually we till all that stuff in. We get that nice fine tilt that you can still see here to plant into. And then, yeah, we just maintain these guys till they're ready to harvest, and all of the fertility so far has been produced just through soil management practices without imported fertilizer. So for a long time, people have been chasing yield. So you spend more money to grow more crops, and that number just supposed to exponentially grow for forever. Like, we'll always want to produce more corn than we did last year. Like in a conventional setting, you might spend $1 to make $1. In a regenerative setting, you might only make 75 cents, but the hope is that you only spent 35 cents to make it. Right. So the margin is actually better because you're not just endlessly spending money chasing yield. Hopefully, farmers who are farming like this in the long term are going to see the value of their land go up as compared to the value of the land in the surrounding area, because they have more fertile, more productive, more sustainable long-term farmland. Farmland being greater as based on the amount of organic matter in your soil is something that people are finding carries a lot of weight, and I think that that's going to end up being something that people in the investment world use as like a benchmark for how successful your practices are. Hopefully, over time, it will serve to de-risk these practices, and then folks like myself and other regenerative farmers can get crop insurance and these same sort of like subsidies and protections that the rest of the agricultural world gets, that make it, at least now, hard for us to compete with those folks. Staying optimistic about the fact that hopefully that's just right around the corner, although
I hope so too.
Cover crop plants fix nitrogen, hold the soil in place, and increase soil fertility. Let's check out a field in the cover crop stage and hear from Eric about his journey finding solutions that work for his moist Western Washington farm.
Direct seeding into cover doesn't work super well in this climate. I think that one of the things that people don't recognize about regenerative farming is that a lot of the concepts that support it come from desert conditions or arid conditions. And a lot of the problems that these farming practices are trying to address have a lot to do with desertification. And so those practices that a lot of people say are like, they want to be these like silver bullet practices where it works everywhere and all you got to do is this and it's this easy, and they don't work here. We're not trying to develop solutions for Eastern Washington or Southern California or the East Coast. Like, we're trying to develop solutions that work here.
On like your farm specifically.
Yep, and maybe a few people in the region, because their property is similar to here, they might be able to benefit from some of this. So we'll take the risk with the practice and say, like, these things work, these things don't. This is what we found to be why. Like, we are never gonna say that we have all the answers. We're gonna put ourselves out there with some of the stuff that we're discovering, and people are gonna poke holes in it, and that's great because we want them to. If you don't question the solutions that you've come up with for this sort of stuff, then you never have the opportunity to review and learn from it. So what that field is actually getting prepped for is cover crop. So
okay, so it's going to look like this in how many years?
It's going to look like this in 3 months.
3 months. Wow. Okay.
If you go and you look in any of the fields that haven't had the opportunity to rest, you don't have as many different levels within that soil of that stratified decomposing organic matter.
The level of daring, compassion, and science that Eric and his team have in their approach to farming was super inspiring. But there was still one more stop on our tour. And that was the Carnation Farms stand, where I enjoyed a delicious sandwich and went home with chicken and soup and snacks for later. Looking at the farm stand was a great opportunity to check out all the different products for sale from the farm. The farm makes prepared foods using many of their crops, but they also sell meat shares of their high-quality beef and lamb. They shear and sell wool yarn from their sheep, and they sell some of their market vegetables directly to customers. Honestly, this farm stand was on point, and I really wished I lived closer because I'd probably spend all my money there. The regenerative farming movement gives me hope for the future, that humans can figure out a way to feed ourselves and take care of the earth at the same time. The biggest thing I took away from this tour is the amount of science, trial, and error involved. But I'm glad there are bold folks out there like Eric willing to experiment, adapt, and learn about the land they farm. Thanks for watching yet another episode of the Hands on Plants series. Feel free to check out more episodes or check out my other content all about foraging for edible and medicinal plants.